good to have you here, John.
This is an amazing place.
Yeah, this is the famous 1158 train car that rests on what I like to call, mysteriously, the abandoned tracks in Lamy, New Mexico.
Is this car in your story?
This particular car is not, but the car behind it, which in the book is called Beecham's 80-foot Pullman train car, is in the book. And there's a deep mystery surrounding that particular train, which we're not going to give away right now.
I like it.
Yeah. So it's so great to have you interview me. I really appreciate this. I know you've read the book, and thankfully you've enjoyed it, which is why I've invited you to interview me.
It's why I came, because it certainly isn't for the money.
Absolutely. Craft services is not worth it.
So Mark, give us a quick synopsis of what the book's about.
Okay, the book starts locally and then becomes a cosmic roadshow. So it begins in the little sleepy village of Lamy, New Mexico, where this train sits right now. And it's about a mystery. There is a very precocious, curious, tough little girl whose name is Philomena, named after my daughter. And when I wrote the book, she was 9 years old. So forever, Philomena in the book will be 9, even though she's 14 now. Okay, so we have a saloon called the Legal Tender Saloon. But 100 years ago, it was called the Pink Garter. And I decided to call it by its original name. So there is a painting that's way, way buried in back in a dark corner in the saloon that keeps changing. And the only one who apparently knows about this is this girl, Philomena. She carries a camera with her, and she is documenting the changes to the painting. Things change. So essentially the painting comes alive. And this is when the story starts rolling, because she has a mystery to solve. Does she choose to solve it alone? No. Her grandmother has a psychic cat who lives in New York City. She gives the psychic cat a train to come out, like this, to come out all the way to Lamy to investigate this strange transformation of a painting. Then another character, an artist called Noshi, is introduced to the book, and he adds his part to the whole solving of the mystery, because he has a painting that in effect begins to change as well. So something is afoot in Lamy, and it has to do, as an overview, with the power of imagination and creativity. And from that point, we leave Lamy, and it becomes, as I say, a cosmic roadshow, and it goes out into the cosmos, where the power of imagination becomes manifest in really strange and surprising ways. And ultimately, it's the story of a group of people who team together that have to find their way home, which is really an ancient story, isn't it? Finding your way home.
The hero's journey.
Yeah, it is the hero's journey. Yeah, and in this case, there are a number of heroes. Yeah.
Wow. So what prompted you to write this?
Yeah. Every day I would walk with my German Shepherd. And back when she was a little healthier, we could walk the tracks for quite a while. In the morning, of course, there's no trains and you have all that to yourself. So we would walk the tracks. I would actually walk on the track. And, you know, Lamy has got a curious character in that there's a number of abandoned, closed up trains. There was a panoramic train here, and it's called the Plaza Lamy Dome car. It's no longer here. And it had a beautiful open top that you could see up through it, and of course the sides. And every day I would walk Bella, and I would look around, and I'd kind of say to myself, well, someone should write a story about this. Someone should incorporate, you know, some of these interesting features of this town. This saloon has been here for over 100 years. It's fascinating. That old train station, I see archival pictures of it going back to when there were horses and buggies and cars from the 30s and old cowboys with giant hats. I thought, well, it is just so historic. Someone should write about it. And that old Pullman, that mysterious Pullman that lives underneath the cottonwood trees, someone should write about it. And it started ruminating, and it was marinating, and I came up with this story that involved all of these touchstones in this little village. And it meant so much to me that I could incorporate these real places in a story that became so fantastical and left Lamy for the cosmos. But it began here.
I can't wait to see how it comes back.
Yeah.
In book 2 or
book
3
2.
or 4.
Well, if I live to book 3, we'll see. But book 2 will answer substantially the questions that were raised in book 1.
In principle.
In principle.
Mark, before we get into some excerpts, I'm just curious. Here's a world-known photographer, spent your whole career doing this. What prompted you to write a juvenile fiction book?
Couple of things. I'm a father. I'm a late age father, and I've taken on the role of fatherhood with a plum. That's different than an orange. And in driving my kids to school every day, and it's a long drive from Lamy, it's about 35 minute drive from Lamy, I really wanted to entertain my kids. Because I think I'm an entertainer at heart, actually, probably a frustrated entertainer at heart. And I would make up stories in the car, impromptu, spontaneous stories. Some are goofy, some were ridiculously scatological, they were just funny stories. And I realized I had a facility with that, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. And I think that was sort of the genesis of my ability to tell stories, not so much with a camera visually, but more with the word. And in this case, it was the spoken word. And I think there was a natural progression into doing the writing when we built the latest iteration of my photography website, where I decided to do some journaling. And I wrote some journal entries that I thought stood up pretty well, and that I decided I wanted to go more long form. And in short answer, I think that's how it all began. I had a clue that I could use the written word creatively.
Well, so tell me this: what are the processes similar when you do a photo shoot and when you create something with words?
No, not necessarily. In my case, I've been a highly reactive shooter, and what I mean by that is that I like to photograph very much documentary style. If there's a shoot I can do without any external lights, I would prefer that. I like a kind of a loose, freewheeling sort of environment when I'm shooting, and that naturally happens when you're doing documentary style. So writing is a little more deliberate and methodical. I would drop into these pockets of inspiration. I realize I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but I would drop into these pockets of inspiration where you just go with it because you're in this sort of state of grace. And you just want to ride that horse for as long as the horse lets you ride it. And then you hit the quicksand. And then you go back to that sort of methodical thing. And sometimes you just shut the whole operation down because you've got no inspiration whatsoever. So I see them as being very different. The one overlap I would say is that spark of, not intuition, but that spark of magic or energy is probably overlapped in both, where when you feel it or you see it or you hear it as you speak the words, you know you've hit on something special.
Mm-hmm. Are there writers that you modeled yourself or were inspired by?
Well, it's funny. I've been inspired a lot by a writer who primarily wrote science fiction, now long dead. Robert L. Heinlein was one of my favorite science fiction writers, and I read him early, and I've continued to read him. I always got engrossed in how he told stories and the scope and scale of his heroes within his ecosystem of the book. Yeah.
Interesting. So I reread the book recently, and I love how slowly it begins, because you know it's going to take off at any moment. And one of the main takeoff points is when, and we don't want to give too much of this away to your readers, but they're up at Noshi's and they're watching the sunset, and suddenly there's an event that's just off the charts wild. What brought that on?
I think there were a number of inspirations. One would be a little bit the writings of Carlos Castaneda, in that there is an enlightened one who shepherds someone else in a mentorship spiritual way. And I'm fascinated with that dynamic. And because I knew the book was going to go to some wild and fantastical places, I needed to prime the pump. And priming the pump was having Noshi introduce Philomena and Daisy by dropping the veil and showing them both what's really going on beyond the veil. Because so much of the book after that is we're in another world, we're in another universe. So yeah.
On that note, do you have some sections you'd like to read?
I think that's a perfect place to start, and I will do that. I'll begin here, page 80. Noshi took a sip of the spicy hot tea, leaned back in his chair, and said, "I called you imagination warriors. I am one, and you and Daisy are too. You both possess the gift of knowing the truth that is revealed when looking deeply into the world. We realize that our path through this life is different from that of the vast majority of people. Philomena, you go your own way, dress your own way, and have an independent vision of yourself in the world. And whether you realize it or not, your curiosity and imagination are the potent fuel that fires your life." Noshi took a bite of a cookie and then, focusing on Daisy, said, "You have great psychic powers and the rare ability to speak. I have only known a few animals with that gift, and they are all truly special beings. I suspect you are questioning what's going on in our little village of Lamy regarding the flow of time." Daisy's fur felt as if an electric current was running through it as she replied, "From the moment I entered the Lamy train station, I got the eerie feeling that I'd crossed a threshold between normal time and wonky time. I felt as if the normal rules about time running in only one direction did not apply here. That time here is fluid, that past and present could exist simultaneously, and that a traveler could move fluidly between the two. Possibly Lamy is the center of a time-space vortex that might be unique in the world." She looked at Philomena and added, "Philomena has put a lot of trust in my psychic abilities, and I really believe that my sixth sense about all this is accurate, as unbelievable as it sounds. Philomena has some photos to show you." Philomena pulled the 5 photos she had taken in the Pink Garter saloon out of her backpack and spread them out on the table, making sure they were in chronological order. Noshi leaned in, looking closely at the sequence. "What was the lapse of time between the first and the last picture?" Noshi inquired. "About 1 week," Philomena replied. Noshi looked at both of them intently and said, "I've known for some time that Lamy is more than it appears to be, and those chosen ones with the gift of true seeing are aware of this. I've begun to play with the idea that creativity and imagination are actually living things." With a puzzled look, Philomena said, "I don't understand. Are you saying this painting in the saloon is alive?" Noshi pointed back to his house and replied, "That painting in there, the one I'm currently working on, has taken on a life of its own too. What I painted was a Native American princess wearing a golden headdress, but it's changing every day now, and I have a theory about it. Here's what I believe to be true. Artists throughout time have been disruptors, transgressors, and outliers. Their job description has always been to create something out of nothing, and to have it be so remarkable that when other people look at it, they get the feeling that the work of art was speaking directly to them, changing the way they see the world and eventually changing their lives. That's all I did when I began the painting, fellow imagination warriors. But our Lamy time-space vortex is getting bigger or more intense. So that creativity and imagination are able to transcend boundaries as never before and become real things. Or maybe the changing painting has something to do with the new oil paints I found in Italy, which have an exquisite yellow pigment that I used liberally to create the crown of the princess. What I'd like to do now is interrupt myself, and I'd like to jump ahead as we've gotten a little sense of Noshi and his two charges. Something happens right around sunset that I feel is really urgent and important, and this is what my friend John was alluding to. So I'm going to jump to it. The sun was a half thumb up from the horizon, and the landscape was becoming transformed as long shadows swept over earth and tree and rock. Noshi had quickly gone back to his house and grabbed 3 old wool blankets that he tied together and then strapped onto his back. Noshi now pointed to a plateau about 100 meters away and said, "We must get to that spot before the sun sets." They walked quickly, following Noshi along the spine of the mountain. All around them, the mountain dropped off abruptly at the sides of the path. Daisy was amazed to see Noshi walk with an effortless, graceful gait, as if he were weightless. By the time they reached their destination, the light had turned from a harsh yellow gold to a muted pastel purple. "Here," Noshi said. They formed a circle facing one another and sat cross-legged on a flat patch of earth overlooking a wide expanse of the mountains that had taken on a dusty purple light. I'm going to turn this around so you can see this extraordinary illustration by local artist Odessa Sawyer. The sun was balanced perfectly on the horizon's edge. Noshi wrapped the wool blankets around Philomena and Daisy and said in a serious voice, "Be still. It's almost time." Daisy's mind was racing and her senses were crackling like fireworks. She focused on the warmth and weight of the blanket to be fully present in the moment. The winds were kicking up now and the sun had set below the mountains, and she could hear them howl in the low brush that grew all around them. Daisy and Philomena faced Noshi and looked into his eyes for some sign of what was to come. Daisy then snuck a peek at Philomena, who already appeared to be in some sort of trance-like state. "Focus your vision upward to the sky," Noshi told them. The sky faded to yellow at the horizon, then further deep blue and purple. "It's beginning," whispered Noshi. Then something unexplainable appeared in the sky above them. Silvery filaments of light began to drop down from the multitudes of stars now shining overhead. Daisy watched in awe as the spidery filaments continued their descent to earth, unable to believe what she was seeing. Entranced, Daisy looked towards Philomena for some kind of confirmation that they were seeing the same thing. Philomena looked back, spellbound, and nodded slowly. The silver threads were now touching all parts of the visible earth, the mountains, valleys, and even the cities far in the distance. Then suddenly, the filaments of light that had touched down on the earth were all connected to one another, like a map of airline routes crisscrossing the globe. Time stood still for them as the glowing filaments connected with everything alive, all natural things, all man-made things, oceans, rivers, deserts, and jungles. During the walk back to Noshi's house, in a hushed and weighty voice, he said, "Always remember this evening, imagination warriors. What you both witnessed in the heavens and on the earth was proof beyond a shadow of a doubt that we are all interconnected," even me with this fly. "Everything that exists is held in a kind of web whose size is unknowable and unfathomable. The most important things are the invisible things. Those who have the gift of true perception, as you both do, have the ability to see and feel the invisible things. At your peril, never forget what has transpired this evening. It was your preparation for the things to come, the invisible things." Daisy knew deep in her soul that the three of them now shared something so profound that they would be bound together all their days by their experience this night.
So there's an unspoken assumption in there that's really special. In your book, you have animals that speak English, and people who understand them, and as if that's normal. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think when I undertook the book, and originally when I started the book, it was not as ambitious as it became. And originally, I don't know if anybody knows this except my immediate family, was that the story was going to be called Daisy May, the Waving Cat of Lamy. And of course Daisy would have to talk because, of course, cats and dogs and all animals talk if you're dealing with Disney or anything else. But in this case, I felt that there was something poignant about some animals having the gift of speech and others not. And obviously in my book, most of the animals have the gift of speech because I have a character called Rama, who's a llama, not this kind of llama, but the animal llama, beast of burden llama. And it was very important to have him use spoken word because honestly, he's one of my favorite characters. But I digress. So it was sort of poignant for me that some animals had the gift and some did not. It was by choice.
And some people will hear it and some don't.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah. So I don't know if this was intended, but it's so cinematic. Did you write it with that intention? Could you visualize things and see it as a film?
Oh, very good. Yes, absolutely. And I think that was the photographer training, that I was able to sort of preview what I wanted in a scene. And I could set it out in a frame, and I could see what Noshi looks like. I could see the home that he built with his own hands. I could see the sun setting and the long shadows over the hillside. I'm very visual, and the book had to be visual. And I think my greatest joy, besides the concepts of the book, were fleshing out the descriptions of things. Explaining how things looked and felt, and if they were tactile and what color they were. That, I think that's the photographer.
Where some of those images are just unforgettable. I can picture the walkways through space that they're being transported on.
The spectral bridge. God, I love that.
And how they can see other spectral bridges and even see sometimes other people.
Yeah.
Rare, but occasionally.
One of my favorite visuals is having these spectral bridges link portals. And the energy behind that, of course, is simply imagination, that at any point you can transport yourself through what I call the continuum from here to there. In a sense, you're folding space and time, and it becomes almost instantaneous. I also love the idea of when it's spectral, of course, you have that vertigo feeling that if you happen to look down, you're kind of looking through your own bridge. And I love that. It's not necessarily something solid. It's spectral. So that's one of my favorite visuals.
It's a great visual. And I love the planet that's covered in fog, but it's an ocean.
Yeah.
And the tide is coming in and out, and there are whirlpools and wet sand. And that's so visual.
In the book, it is foretold as a place of tribulation, of trial and tribulation, and all that you know is that water is a part of it. And for some reason, maybe it's because I'm a water sign, that and we don't live anywhere near water, we live in the desert, that I have a fascination with water. And I particularly have a fascination with low-lying water that appears to be an ocean, and it is boundless and endless, and that it comes in and it comes out. But you could, at certain times a day, walk for miles, as you can that was at Mount Saint Michel, where at low tide you can walk the 10 miles or however far it is to the castle, but at another time of day you're underwater. And I find that a fascinating concept.
There's that old short story, and I forget who wrote it, but it's about, I think it's kids who are playing and the fog comes in like that, and they're in the water that's ankle deep, and they don't know which way to go.
Love it.
With the tide, and it's horrifying.
It's horrifying. Yeah. And the only thing that makes it less horrifying is we have a very close-knit little group, and they really pull together. And I think one of the concepts of the book that I wouldn't want to overlook, besides imagination and creativity, is teamwork. People are pulling together. It's not a zero-sum game, which unfortunately so much of our world has become. People pull together.
Mark, read us something again.
Okay. There's a character, there's a number of these characters I find very interesting. I also think on some level they're all reflections of me. All these characters, and probably every author who's ever written a book finds a person that reflects some of their personality or characteristics. There's a secretive, elusive gentleman by the name of Temperani. He moves seamlessly through time. He was born during the Renaissance. He is an artist. I won't give too much away, but he uses his creative ability to paint and the use of imagination to travel through the continuum to just about anywhere he chooses to go. So I'm going to read you a passage that has to do with Temperani. It had been necessary for Temperani to move every 40 or 50 years. Though he was an inconspicuous man, he had moved on whenever people began to talk about him. He was never comfortable with attention and was concerned that others might discover his secret powers and means of travel through time and space. Over the centuries, he had only made one painting with a human figure in it, and that was a Native American warrior. Being alive as long as he had been, and having seen so much stupidity, he had an ingrained apprehension about his human brethren. There had been only two people to whom he had entrusted his time travel secret, due to necessity: Beecham and Nahimana, the Native American warrior. Temperani became aware that randomness can be as powerful a force as intention when he had encountered the slightly addled train aficionado Beecham in his Pullman car on an abandoned railroad track in the village of Lamy, and made a pact with him to store his paintings. After creating many paintings, Temperani had realized he needed more storage space than was possible in his little room in the Scottish Rite Temple. Temperani had been drawn to the unassuming village of Lamy, which is where we are conducting this interview, due to its location between an arroyo on the east and low rolling mountains to the west, with train tracks in the middle. Being highly attuned to temporal anomalies, he had chosen the village to be his second base of operation. He had taken a trip to Santa Fe to purchase art supplies, and as his train car pulled into the Lamy station, he had had a familiar feeling of passing over a threshold to a place with temporal anomalies. He had thought to himself, in that Pullman car, behind the cottonwood trees, there's a time-space continuo. That was the Italian word for continuum. Infiniteness. I wonder if the current owners know of the mysterious train car's properties. I can sense infiniteness within it. He had always known that artists were opportunists at heart, and had decided there might be an opportunity to store more of his vast inventory of paintings in the train, where no one would suspect their existence. Subsequently, he had introduced himself to the train car's owner, Beecham, with whom he had made an agreement. And I'll stop there, but it's an introduction to two characters.
So, Mark, I'm curious. The book's been out for a while. What kind of feedback do you get from young people?
Well, the kids who have read it want me to write book two. And that's what I've heard consistently. When is the second book coming out? I was told by the station agent, Cindy, a number of months back, that a young boy dragged his father to the train depot, and he went up to Cindy and he said, is this where the magic happened? Is this the place? And Cindy communicated this to me and said this young boy dragged his father here just because he had read the book and was so passionate about seeing where it took place. And I'm sorry I didn't meet this kid, but the kids who have read it really liked it. What's interesting is that older folk, and I mean 50s, 60s, 70s, and even in their 80s, really like it because the book is a throwback, and it was expressly written that way. There's no references to digital media. There's one reference to a phone message, and that's it. There's no anything, iPhone, iPad, anything. So the book exists out of time, and it's kind of curious that the book is about time. So old folks kind of remember, there was one gal who said she remembers back when the Green Hornet was on radio. And this is going back a ways. And she said she would sit by the radio and she would just listen to these descriptions. And she just was so enthralled with that she entered that world. So I think older folks really get the book. That may not be the answer you want because it's juvenile fiction, but I think that range is both.
That's
like
fascinating. And do you get comments about it as a film?
Folks who have read it said I think it would make a great film, but that's sort of beyond my abilities to have happen.
Interesting. Well, thanks.
Well, you're quite welcome. Thank you.
I can't wait to read the second one.
Well, you'll have to wait. But I'm on it.